Hey guys, tonight we slip off our boots and step into the dusty quiet of the Wild West. The sky stretches above you like a velvet sheet, spangled with stars. A warm breeze whispers through the tall prairie grass, and somewhere far off a coyote sings to the moon. You're wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sitting just inside a creaky wooden cabin that smells like old pine and fried beans. All is still except for the soft gurgle in your stomach, reminding you of that questionable chili dot. So you rise, groan softly, and shuffle outside. The night air kisses your skin, dry and cool. Every creak of the floorboards seems louder out here. In the distance, the outhouse stands like a crooked little sentry under the silver glow of moonlight. It's a small, slumped shack with a carved crescent moon peeking from its door. That curious shape, it's more than just decoration. But tonight, as you make your way toward it in the dark, you're not thinking about symbols. You're thinking about how badly you need it, and how quickly that chili is planning its revenge. This wasn't luxury. This was survival. And frankly, you probably wouldn't last a week doing this nightly routine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from some corner of the world with better plumbing, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the outhouse, boots crunching softly on packed dirt. The structure itself is modest 3 wooden walls and a roof, if you're lucky, and the door barely hangs on its hinges. But it does the job, mostly. You reach out and run your hand over the faded moon on the door. Why a moon? Was it just decoration, or did it once mean something more? Historians still argue whether the crescent was originally a universal symbol of ladies only. Some say that in early America, outhouses often had a star or sun for men and a moon for women. Over time, one design simply survived while the other faded. But others believe that's just a tidy explanation with no real proof. What we do know is that moon-carved outhouse doors became a staple of frontier imagery, almost a badge of rustic. On her dot inside the shack, the smell hits you. Not unbearable, but unmistakable. This is a pit toilet, after all, just a hole beneath a wooden seat dug deep into the earth. No plumbing, no fan, no flush. Your flashlight flickers as you ease the chi. Doors shut and lower yourself onto a surface that's seen better days. Still, there's something almost peaceful about it. Just you, the night, and the quiet croaking of frogs somewhere near a creek. If you ignore the splinters and the breeze under the door, it's, well, not pleasant, but manageable. And out here on the prairie, that was enough to build this humble throne. Settlers used whatever they had. Sometimes scrap lumber, sometimes logs or sawed bricks. The fancier ones might have had a latch or even newspaper insulation on the walls to cut the wind. But mostly, you were lucky just to have a working door and a stable seat. And yes, accidents did happen. You'll hear tales from great-grandparents about collapsing floors, rotted boards, or wintertime incidents too chilling to describe. One story from Nebraska in the 1880s tells of a rancher's outhouse that was blown over during a freak windstorm while he was inside. He emerged dizzy, dirty, and entirely rethinking his decision to live off dash grid dot. As your eyes adjust to the darkness, you notice the spiders in the corners, the mud dauber nests near the ceiling. The smell seems to change with the wind. A gust from behind, and it's barely noticeable. A breeze from the front, and it's a full nasal assault. You hold your breath and do what you came to do. Outhouses weren't just a feature of backwoods cabins. They were standard for towns, too. Even well-off families in growing cities still had to trudge outside in rain or snow to use theirs. In some cases, there were even shared outhouses between neighbors. Imagine the awkward conversations that could happen when two people showed up at the same time, each clutching a tin lantern and a look of quiet desperation. You wipe your hands on your pants, suddenly conscious that there's no sink nearby. Hygiene was relative. Maybe there's a bucket of water somewhere, but more likely, you're just going to deal with it. That's why so many people carried handkerchiefs or wore gloves even in summer. Not just for style, for survival. A cricket chirps near the door. The wind picks up. You reach for the latch, but the door creaks open on its own. For a split second, you wonder if someone or something is out there, but it's only the breeze playing its nightly tricks. You step back outside, grateful for the fresh air, the stars, and the simple joy of a task completed. The shack behind you creaks again, as if sighing in relief. You glance once more at that carved moon and shake your head. Funny, you think. It's just a shape. But somehow it's also a time machine, a symbol that instantly takes you back to a slower, smellier, and significantly less convenient era. The Wild West wasn't just saloons and duels. It was this: midnight walks, cold seats, no toilet paper, and always that little moon watching from the door. You wake to the sound of a rooster, not your alarm clock, just some feathered neighbors shouting at the sun. It's morning now, and as you roll off your straw-filled mattress, your muscles protest. Sleeping on a rope bed is about as relaxing as lying across a loose wooden fence. The floorboards creak under your feet. Dust floats in the sunlight, slicing through a cracked window. Coffee is simmering somewhere nearby, burnt, thick, and somehow gritty even before you pour it. But first things first, hygiene, or at least a version of it. There's no sink to splash water on your face. Instead, you walk over to the wash basin. It's a porcelain bowl on a rickety stand with a pitcher of cool water beside it. You pour just enough to get a thin trickle going and splash. You're faced with a gasp. If you're lucky, there's a little soap homemade lye-based stuff that smells like ash and regret. It burns your hands a little. Not exactly cucumber mint. You look for a toothbrush, there isn't one. Maybe a stick with frayed ends if you're fancy, or just some baking soda and a rag if you're not. Dental care in the Wild West? Let's just say people smiled with their mouths closed, and for good reason. Now it's time for the morning ritual. You already know what that means. Back to the outhouse, you head outside. The sun hasn't yet burned off the morning chill, and dew slicks the grass. There's no choice about where to go. You've got one option, and it's down the path behind the barn near the fence line. You wonder again why it's so far. Why not just build it closer? Turns out there's logic behind the distance. Nobody wanted the stake near the house. In warmer months, the smell could drift indoors. clinging to curtains and clothes. And the flies, well, they were a full-on army. Keeping your living quarters separate from the outhouse was crucial for both health and sanity. The pit beneath the seat would fill slowly over time, and without regular cleaning, which almost no one did, it could become a hazard. Methane gas buildup was real, though tales of spontaneous outhouse explosions are rare. They weren't entirely fictional, especially when lanterns or candles were involved. Plus, putting the outhouse farther away minimized the risk of groundwater contamination. Many homes had a well or cistern, and you didn't want yesterday's chili backing up into tonight's drinking water, although in more than a few towns it did. And let's just say dysentery was not just an Oregon Trail meme. It was a very real, very gross way to go. You reach the outhouse door again, now lit by full daylight. Somehow it looks worse in the sun. You can see the warped boards, the spider webs, the bird droppings on the roof. You hesitate. You really don't want to open that door again, but nature insists. Inside, it's exactly as grim as last night. The only difference is visibility. You can see the pit now and regret it instantly. You sit, careful not to touch anything you don't have to. The wood is worn smooth from use, but still full of splinters. You wonder how often people got tetanus from just sitting. Now you're thinking, why was this the solution? Why not dig a deeper pit and just never worry about it again? But see, pits filled up, and when they did, the whole shack had to be moved. That's right, outhouses were often built on skids or loose foundations, so they could be dragged to a new hole when the old one filled. You didn't empty the pit. You just left it behind, covered it with dirt, started over somewhere else. Recycling, frontier style. One man's chore was another man's business opportunity. Night soil men. Yes, that was a job title, were paid to clean or relocate filled pits. And no surprise, they were considered the absolute lowest rung of society. Even among gamblers, snake oil salesmen, and toothless piano players, nobody envied the night soil guy. You wipe your hands on your trousers again, because of course there's no sink. You step out into the sun, blinking, already feeling the need for a real bath, which won't be happening today. Baths were a weekly thing, maybe if the weather was good and someone had hauled the water, and you went last because Dad always bathed first. You think of that tub full of murky gray water, each kid dunked in like sad laundry. Historians still argue whether the frontier's sanitation habits were better or worse than those in the cities back east. Sure, there were fewer people and more open land, but city dwellers were inventing sewer systems by the late 1800s, while ranchers were still sprinting out to the little shack under the stars. Either way, germs didn't care if you lived in Chicago or Cheyenne. As you walked back to the house, you passed the chicken coop and the barn, each one its own source of smells. Everything out here had a scent. Even the wind seemed to carry dust and manure. You're beginning to realize that fresh country air is more of a marketing term than a lived experience. You duck back inside, and someone hands you a coffee cup, metal, chipped, and dangerously hot. You sip. It tastes like scorched earth and strength. Maybe you're finally getting used to it. Then you hear a thunk outside. Someone's already grabbing the shovel. It's time to dig a new pit. You sigh, because today you're on outhouse duty. And you now understand why that crescent moon on the door looks more like a warning sign than a decoration. You grip the shovel with both hands, the wood worn smooth from years of use. The morning sun is climbing, and already the back of your neck feels warm. You're standing behind the outhouse, eyeing a patch of dry earth with reluctant resolve. It's time to dig. Not a little hole, no. This is a new outhouse pit. And if you're doing it right, it's going to be 6 feet deep, wide enough to catch future disasters, and hopefully not anywhere near where the last one leaked. You take the first jab into the ground. It hits a rock. Of course, dot as you work. Sweat starts to bead on your brow. The dirt here is dry, compacted, full of roots and clay. You pause to wipe your face with a sleeve that's already soaked. Digging a pit toilet isn't romantic. It's not cowboy tough. It's just hot, grueling, filthy labor. And there's no glory in it, but there's reason behind every scoop of dirt. See, back in the Wild West, outhouse placement was a delicate science, at least for those who cared about not dying. You didn't want it near your well for obvious reasons. You didn't want it downhill from the house in case of rain runoff. You wanted it just far enough that you couldn't smell it during supper, but not so far that the midnight dash became an Olympic sprint, and the direction mattered too. The door usually faced east or south away from prevailing winds and toward morning light. No one wanted to fumble with a latch in pitch darkness if they didn't have to. Historians still argue whether settlers followed set health guidelines or just built wherever it looked convenient. Some evidence points to informal best practices passed along from neighbor to neighbor. Others argue people learn through trial, error, and unfortunately illness. As you dig, you remember the last time the outhouse was moved. The pit had overflowed in a spring rain, and let's just say the chickens were never quite the same. Lesson learned. You take a break and sip from a dented canteen. Warm water. Better than nothing. As you stretch your back, you catch sight of the old outhouse itself. It's a little off-kilter now. The door swings slightly in the breeze. The roof sags. You remember the day it was built, 3 of you pounding in nails, laughing until someone dropped the hammer through the floorboards. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Now it's time for its next resting place. You get back to digging. Each layer of soil reveals tiny surprises, bits of pottery, an old button, a snail shell. Sometimes people even buried trash near their privies. Archaeologists today love that. They've dug up everything from antique marbles to lost coins, and half-used bottles of homemade medicine. Outhouse pits were like time capsules, gross, earthy, slightly tragic time capsules. There's even a theory that folks use the outhouse hole on purpose to dispose of embarrassing items. Think broken heirlooms, failed experiments, or letters best left unread. Because really, what better place to hide your secrets than beneath a pile of human waste? A breeze rustles through the grass. The smell from the old pit wafts over, faint but sharp. You dig faster. After another hour, the hole is done, deep, wide, and ominous. You tap the edges, smooth the lip, and place a flat rock nearby to keep curious critters from falling in before the structure goes up. Now comes the moving. With a few helpers and a whole lot of heaving, you lift the old outhouse from its resting spot. The boards groan in protest. One side starts to peel away, revealing the fact that nails were reused and reused again. But somehow it holds Dot's step. By step, you inch the shack across the field to the new pit. It's a clumsy dance of grunts, swearing, mostly under your breath, and occasional collapses into the grass. But eventually the outhouse finds its new home, plunked down squarely over the fresh hole. You adjust the angle. The door creaks just right. The moon cutout catches the light. Almost poetic Dot, then comes the finishing touch. A bit of lime. No, not the fruit. Lime powder calcium oxide was tossed down into the pit to help control odor and slow decomposition. It didn't work miracles, but it made a noticeable difference. At least that's what people said as they held their noses. You sprinkle a handful into the hole like seasoning over a cursed stew. Dust rises and settles. Ceremony complete, Dot, and now the old pit. You walk back to the previous site. The hole is still there, shallow and sour. The first thing you do is fill it in shovelful, after shovelful of fresh dirt. The goal isn't to erase the past, just to keep anyone from stepping into it. Once it's full, you top it with a small stone marker. Nothing fancy, just a reminder not to plant tomatoes here next year. You've made that mistake before. Some folks planted flowers over old pit's sunflowers, or hollyhocks to both disguise and deodorize the area. Others just avoided it entirely, letting weeds grow wild. Either way, the land remembered what had happened there. And sometimes, on hot days, so did your nose. Back at the new outhouse, you step inside to admire your work. It's the same. Same smell, same creaky seat, same spiders. But now it's over fresh earth, and for a few months at least, you can. Pretend this is an upgrade. You close the door behind you and breathe out slowly. The breeze whistles through a crack in the wood. Somewhere nearby, a hawk cries out. You survived another day on outhouse duty, and no one fell in. That's what passes for success out here. You lean against the wall and smile. You'll sleep well tonight. Just maybe not too deeply. You do still have to make the midnight trip, after all. You lean back from your plate of beans and cornbread, belly full and eyelids heavy. The sun has slipped behind the hills, and everything outside is dipped in that silvery blue shade that only happens after sunset and before true night. The fire crackles low, casting shadows on the log walls. You stretch, stand, and feel the inevitable. Time to visit the moon. The outhouse sits in its usual spot, quiet, waiting. And again, the crescent moon on the door catches your eye. It glows faintly, in the moonlight like it's winking at you. It's so strange, really. Why a moon? Why always that crescent shape? You shuffle over, mind drifting, as your feet kick through dry leaves. As far as anyone knows, the moon-shaped cutout was more than just a ventilation window. It had meaning. A long time ago, in the colonial period or even earlier, outhouses sometimes featured symbols to indicate who they were for. Moons, they say, meant ladies, a sunburst or star, gents. At least, that's one version. But here's the thing: historians still argue whether that gender symbol theory ever truly held. Some say it's folklore, made up much later. Others point out that many frontier towns had only one outhouse per household, shared by all genders, so the symbols weren't about who went in, but what the building was. The moon might have been a simple way to distinguish the outhouse from, say, a tool shed. Or maybe it was just tradition, copied again and again until it stuck, like a meme carved in wood. And it wasn't just decorative. That moon cutout also had a practical function. It let in a sliver of light. When you're using the outhouse in the middle of the night, even a faint glow makes a world of difference. It's the original nightlight, courtesy of the actual moon. You reach the shack and trace the shape with your finger. The edges are worn smooth. Inside, it smells faintly of pine from when someone tried to freshen things up with tree branches. It didn't work. You slide the door open, and the carved crescent lets in just enough light to see the seat. A simple board with a round hole. Sometimes there'd be a lid, sometimes not. You sit carefully, the wood cool under your thighs, and exhale. You've read somewhere that the moon symbol might also tie to ancient associations between the moon and female cycles, making the shape a quiet nod to women's space. But then again, it might just be because moons are easy to carve and look pretty. Nobody really knows. That's the thing with symbols, they're more about repetition than reason. The crescent became iconic over time, appearing in comic strips, Halloween decorations, even cartoons. It didn't matter whether you were in Texas or Montana. If you saw that moon on a door, you knew exactly what kind of business was done inside. You think about modern bathrooms and how we still use sign stick, figures with skirts or pants, arrows, letters, even emojis now. It's funny how humans always find ways to label where the poop goes. The moon just did it with style. Suddenly, you remember a story told by a traveling peddler. He claimed he once saw an outhouse with both, a moon and a star one, on each door of a double-seater. His and hers, he'd said with a wink. Whether that was true or just a tall tale, you'll never know. But it stuck with you. You finish your business and stand. As your eyes adjust again, you notice something etched faintly below the crescent moon initials, carved deep into the wood, probably generations old. Maybe a child marking their territory. Maybe a lovesick teen. Maybe just boredom. The outhouse was a place where people left things behind, some of them literal, others more personal. On the inside walls, more graffiti, little hearts, names, crude jokes that have lost their punchlines to time. You run your fingers over a carved horse, surprisingly detailed. Someone spent time here, a lot of time. Back outside, the wind rustles the tall grass. The stars blink into view one by one. You close the door behind you and hear it thud gently, the moon once again centered in its frame. You stare at it a moment longer. You start to notice how many other things out here echo that shape. The sliver of a soup ladle, the curve of a scythe hanging in the barn, even the smile of the neighbor you passed earlier, today wide, toothy, crescent-shaped. The moon is everywhere out here, tucked into the corners of daily life. You walk back toward the cabin, bare feet padding softly on the cool ground. A cricket chirps nearby, joined by another. The night hums with quiet life, and somewhere behind you, the little shack with the moon waits for its next visitor. It's more than just a toilet. It's a symbol, a time capsule, a piece of shared culture carved into wood. And though no one ever really talked about it around the dinner table, everyone knew. The moon on the door meant relief, routine, and a moment of solitude in a busy, dusty world. You glance up at the real moon overhead, glowing full and heavy in the sky. It looks down over every prairie, every dusty trail, every crooked little outhouse, with a matching grin. And in some strange, stinky way, it ties them all together. The next day, the sky turns a dusty gray, and a gusty wind kicks up from the east. Clouds tumble overhead like slow-moving wagons, and the air smells like old dirt, and something more electric like a storm is coming. You're outside tending the fence when you hear it. A sharp crack, followed by a low rumble. Thunder, distant but unmistakable. You glance over your shoulder at the outhouse. It leans just slightly to the left now, like it knows what's coming. Storms on the prairie were no joke. When they rolled in, they brought hard rain, hail, and wind strong enough to knock over cattle. And sometimes the outhouse, too. You hurry to secure the barn doors, stow the tools, and flip the washtub over the firewood. But that outhouse, it's out there alone with nothing to brace it but habit and hope. As the wind picks up, you watch its door flap open and shut with a slow, rhythmic groan. The crescent moon swings like a pendulum through each gust. It's sort of beautiful, in a please don't tip over kind of way. Then comes the rain. Sheets of it, drenching the ground in minutes. You huddle under the porch, wrapped in a blanket, squinting through the downpour to see if the outhouse is still upright. It is, but it's swaying, and you suddenly remember the story of Jed Carter. Poor Jed. He'd been out in the middle of a storm just like this one, trying to beat nature to the punch after a hearty dinner. He'd only just sat down when a twister swept across the plain, lifted the outhouse Jed included, and dropped it 3 feet to the left. Jed was fine, except for the part where he fell through the seat when the shack landed. They say he came out cussing so hard, the preacher wouldn't speak to him for a month. You'd laugh, except your own outhouse looks ready to try the same stunt. Design flaws? Oh yes, outhouses weren't exactly engineered to code. Most were thrown, together with scrap lumber and nails reused, so often they had the shape of corkscrews. The base was often just 4 rocks, or if you were lucky, a few boards laid like skis to help slide it around. That was fine until the wind got ideas. Some folks tried to anchor theirs down with rope, or even drive long spikes through the frame and into the earth. But more often they just shrugged and hoped. After all, if it collapsed, it could be rebuilt. What really mattered was when it collapsed. Mid-use, that was a tragedy. Mid-winter? Worse, mid-thunderstorm? Legendary dot, you watch the wind jerk the door open again, then slam it shut. The frame wobbles. One of the old boards on the back wall peels away like wet paper. You make a mental note. Repairs tomorrow, if it survives tonight. And that's the thing about outhouses, nobody built them to last. They weren't monuments. They were functional, temporary, and endlessly replaceable. If a blizzard knocked one flat, you salvaged what you could, dug a new pit, and started over. Historians still argue whether that attitude came from practicality or from cultural shame around bodily functions. After all, while other buildings were praised for craftsmanship and longevity, no one ever bragged about their privy's architecture. It was the forgotten structure, purpose-built and purpose-neglected. Inside, the storm rages on. The thunder grows closer, echoing across the plains. You hear a crack sharp and sudden, and a moment later, the lights flicker. Not that you had electric lights, of course. It's just a lantern swaying from its hook, casting shadows like ghosts across the walls. You peek out again. Still standing Dot, somehow Dot, you remember stories passed down from neighbors. One about a boy who went into the outhouse during a summer storm and found himself nose to nose with a terrified badger trying to wait out the rain. Another tale of a structure so rickety a clap of thunder made the whole thing slump sideways like a melting cake. There were stories of roofs flying off, of doors breaking loose and sailing through the air like wooden frisbees. And then there were the freezes. You shiver at the memory. Last January, the cold was so bitter the seat froze over. That smooth pine board turned into a miniature glacier. Someone had tried pouring hot water on it to thaw it out. The result? A perfect, treacherous sheet of black ice and a bruised tailbone you still feel when the weather changes. Outhouse designs varied across the West, of course. Some were just upright boxes. Others had pitched roofs, little ventilation slots, or even hand-carved decorations if the builder had a creative streak. But what none of them had was insulation. In winter they froze. In summer they baked. In storms they trembled. And through it all, you still had to use them. You feel another gust shake the house itself. Somewhere outside, a chicken squawks in protest. Then comes a final clap of thunder closer this time. It rolls over the hills like a wave. You brace yourself, listening for the crash of timbers or the squish of a pit meeting daylight. Dot. Nothing. When the storm finally passes, you step out again, blinking at the clearing sky. The grass is flattened, puddles shimmer across the yard, and your outhouse, bless, it still stands, leaning a little more than before, one side slightly caved, the door barely holding Dot, but standing. You walk over, gently push on the frame. It groans. You open the door and glance inside. A puddle's formed beneath the seat, grate, and the spider webs have somehow multiplied, but otherwise it's usable. Dot, you close the door with care. That little moon is now wet and shining, a sleepy crescent catching the early stars. It's seen worse, you think, and so have you. The first frost arrives like a quiet ambush. One night you go to sleep under a threadbare quilt with a warm belly, and by morning your breath is visible in the air. The grass crunches underfoot. The water bucket has a thin lid of ice, and everything feels like it's made of stone, including the outhouse seat. You tug on your thickest coat, wrap a scarf around your neck, and pull a sock cap low over your ears. But none of that helps the reality of what's about to happen, because the colder it gets, the worse the outhouse experience becomes. And when you step outside, you can already feel it in your bones. This is not going to be a pleasant trip. Your boots squeak against frozen mud as you march your way out to the little shack. The sun hasn't yet made it over the horizon, and your hands sting with cold even inside your gloves. Each breath feels sharp. You try to imagine warm things, a fire, fresh coffee, summer. But your mind can only focus on how soon your backside is going to meet a piece of wood that hasn't felt sunlight in 12 hours. You open the outhouse door. It's stiff, reluctant to move, like it resents being opened. Inside, your lantern throws shadows on the frozen walls. You hold it up to see the seat, which looks vaguely frosted. No, definitely frosted. You poke it with a finger, covered. Of course. Solid, you sigh. Historians still argue whether outhouse visits in winter-shaped frontier, resilience, or simply broke people's spirits. Likely both. One Kansas homesteader famously recorded in her diary that using the outhouse during a February blizzard was like meeting death with your drawers down. Dramatic? Maybe. But you're starting to understand the sentiment. You sit quickly, not because it's comfortable, but because hovering is worse. The shock is immediate. Your body tenses, and for a second you forget why you even came out here. Every bit of warmth is ripped away, and suddenly the wind whistles through a crack in the door like it's laughing at you. You count the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Done. No lingering, no thinking. You're up and moving before you even remember to breathe, and now you face another challenge: wiping, because you forgot that the paper is frozen stiff, or worse, damp and then frozen. A small square of newspaper, rock hard, curls in your hand like a piece of kindling. You take a breath and press on. There's no other option. The good news: no bugs, no snakes, no swarming flies or raccoons making eye contact with you at the worst moment. In winter, the outhouse belongs to you and the wind, but that doesn't make it better. You think about those who came before you, homesteaders who braved entire seasons in cabins with no insulation and outhouses that required snowshoes. Some folks got clever. You remember visiting a neighbor's homestead where the outhouse had a second little bench inside the house, a chamber pot setup that was only used on the coldest nights. He'd even rigged a curtain around it for privacy. It was like having a VIP stall in a one-room home, but for most, the routine stayed the same. Bundle up, brace yourself, and bolt to the outhouse before your bladder froze. Some tried warm. The seat first, maybe by sitting on a heated brick or wrapping it in cloth. But more often, they just got used to it, or didn't. One particularly stubborn rancher once nailed a thick slab of leather over the seat to act as insulation. It helped for a week until the mice discovered it and turned it into a shredded nest. You hurry through the rest of the process and open the door again. Outside, the world is pale blue. The fields stretch out under a crust of frost, and smoke curls from the cabin chimney in the distance. The sun peeks over the ridge, weak and yellow, like it hasn't had its coffee yet. You glance back at the outhouse, which now looks like a tiny ice castle. The roof sparkles. Icicles cling to the corners. That little crescent moon on the door, it's got a halo of rime around it, like a snow globe version of its usual dusty self. Despite the misery, there's something kind of magical about it. Still, quiet, cold. Yes, but beautiful in a way only the West in winter can be. Everything feels slower, older, simpler, until your feet start to go numb, and then you're running back to the cabin as fast as your stiff legs will carry you. Inside, you collapse by the fire. Your hands thaw painfully. Someone offers you coffee. You grunt in thanks. A younger kid asks, "Did you make it?" You nod solemnly. "And the seat?" he whispers. You raise a single eyebrow. He winces. Oof. Later, bundled under 3 layers of quilts, you hear the wind howl outside and know someone else is about to make the same frozen pilgrimage. You don't envy them. You just listen for the door slam and the muttered curses as they return. Winter made everything harder. Cooking, hauling water, staying warm. But nothing quite humbled you like a 5 a.m. trip to the outhouse on a windy, sub-zero morning. You drift toward sleep, the warmth of the fire finally undoing the chill in your bones. And in the corner of your mind, you see that crooked little shack. Again, its moon glinting like a promise. A cold, wooden, slightly sarcastic promise. The morning is unusually quiet, and that makes you suspicious. You step outside, mug in hand, steam curling from the top like a tiny campfire. The grass is damp from last night's rain, and the chickens are oddly subdued. Normally they're already flapping around, chasing each other, pecking at imaginary bugs. Today, silence. You glance toward the outhouse dot. Something feels dot off. The door is ajar. You squint at it from the porch. Did someone forget to close it? Or is the wind playing tricks again? You approach, each step squelching slightly in the damp soil. A faint buzzing sound comes from somewhere nearby, flies maybe. You grip the edge of the door and pull it open slowly. Then you freeze, sitting on the wooden seat, coiled like a lazy garden hose, and flicking its tongue in the air is a snake. Not enormous, but long enough. You don't move. It doesn't move. You both simply exist in mutual horror for a moment that lasts a decade. You take a slow step back and gently let the door swing shut again. Nope. Welcome to one of the most well-documented and least talked about features of Wild West outhouse life. Surprise guests. It wasn't just snakes, though. They were the most feared. It was spiders, frogs, raccoons, wasps, rats, and once, according to one panicked diary entry, a very confused squirrel. You think back to a time when old man Willis swore a porcupine had gotten into his outhouse. No one believed him until he hobbled into town with 2 broken boards, a bleeding palm, and a very uncomfortable expression. Outhouses weren't sealed. Gaps in the walls, floors, and roof made them an open invitation for anything looking for shelter. And the pit beneath? Dark, cool, always slightly damp. Paradise for a dozen kinds of critters. Some outhouses had makeshift screens or traps, but most didn't bother. Folks would stomp loud on the way up, rattle the door, or bang on the side with a stick just to announce themselves, like knocking on nature's front door. You learn to do this too. It becomes habit. You don't ask if someone's in there. You warn whatever's inside that you're coming in. Historians still debate whether most outhouse injuries involved accidents with the structure or the creatures inside it. There's no real census on snake-related bathroom trauma, but frontier memoirs are sprinkled with tales of nasty surprises. One Montana woman recalled nearly fainting when a bullfrog jumped between her knees mid-squat. Another account from Oklahoma claims a rattlesnake made its home in the pit itself, undisturbed for a week before anyone dared to check. You grab a long stick and carefully push open the door again. The snake is gone now, probably slithered down, through the hole or out a crack. Either way, you're not sitting there today. You turn and walk quickly back toward the barn, muttering about indoor plumbing like it's the promised land. You need a plan B. Some folks had chamber pots for situations like this. Enamel basins tucked under beds or hidden behind curtains. Unpleasant, sure, but better than braving a snake pit at dawn. Others used thunder mugs, heavier ceramic pots with a handle, often ornately decorated for reasons no one can really explain. Somehow, painting flowers on a poop jug didn't make it smell any better. Of course, thunder mugs came with their own risks, like tipping over, which happened more than once, usually on a carpet, or worse, on someone else's boots. Back in the house, you share the news about your slithery visitor. Nobody's surprised. Someone tells the story of Cousin George, who once sat down without looking and got stung by a wasp so badly he walked crooked for a week. Another cousin reportedly brought a rooster hen with him for moral support. It did not end well for the rooster. You brew another pot of coffee and add an extra spoonful. You've earned it. Later that afternoon, you get brave. You arm yourself with a broom and return to the outhouse. You bang the side, swing the door open with more confidence than you feel, and peer inside. Nothing. Just the usual shadows, the familiar stink, and the ever-faithful crescent moon on the door. Still, you take the broom and poke beneath the seat, just to be sure. It's empty. Mostly. You exhale, then laugh. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe the snake was just a one-time thing. Or maybe it'll be back tomorrow with a few friends. You never really know. You decide to make a few improvements. You nail a scrap of wire mesh over the back vent. Add a strip of cloth to the bottom of the door to keep out crawling guests. It won't stop everything, but maybe it'll slow them down. Maybe it'll give you just enough time to scream as dusk falls. You sit on the porch again, watching the outhouse sway slightly in the breeze. It looks peaceful now, like a crooked little cabin just doing its job. But you know better. That shack is a jungle outpost, a fortress with no roof. A roulette wheel of survival. Still, you'll return. You always do. Eventually. You're halfway through splitting firewood when you see old Martha Hobbs trudging up the path from her cabin down the hill. She's wearing her usual shawl, carrying a basket of something wrapped in a towel, probably molasses bread or more. Of those mysterious boiled beans, she claims help keep a person regular. You wave, she nods back, and you already know what's coming. She reaches your porch, plants herself on a stool, and with all the subtlety of a church bell says, "I hear your outhouse got visited by a snake yesterday." You blink. "Already?" "Oh, honey," she chuckles. "News like that moves faster than whiskey at a barn dance." That's the thing about outhouses. They were private in theory, but public in spirit. Everyone had one, and everyone talked about them. Whispered gossip over the fence. Shared horror stories over pie. Bragged about seat improvements like they were unveiling a new carriage. Outhouse etiquette wasn't written down, but it was very real. Like, don't take a book unless you're willing to share it. Or, if you clog the hole with corn husks, you dig it out. And perhaps most important, no talking while someone's inside, unless the building's on fire or you're handing them a rattlesnake in a burlap sack as a prank. You recall when your neighbor Jim added a little shelf inside his for candles. He said, romantic lighting. It became the talk of the ridge for 2 weeks. Someone even carved Love Shack above his door. And yes, someone else immediately carved Stinks Like Love, too, underneath it. Historians still argue whether the outhouse was seen as a point of shame or status in Western communities. Some were proud of their whitewashed walls, flower boxes outside, even curtains on the window, if there was one. Others kept theirs hidden behind sheds or tried to camouflage them with tall grass and wishful thinking. But one thing's for sure, everyone knew who went when. You step out after breakfast, and 3 different heads turn slightly in your direction. Nobody says anything, but everyone notices Dot in a town without real secrets. The outhouse became a sort of social checkpoint. You could judge a person by the time they took, how far they walked to get there, whether they whistled or grunted, whether they emerged wiping sweat or giggling. People noticed Dot. There were certain hours you avoided too much traffic. Certain days you cleaned it up a bit in case visitors came by. Heaven forbid your in-laws use a dirty outhouse and report back to the rest of the county. You think back to that spring social when Clara Jensen's cousin from back east visited. She'd gone out to the outhouse with a parasol and a lace handkerchief and come back looking like she'd survived a bear attack. The gossip lasted longer than her engagement. Etiquette even extended to how you announced your need. I'm going. To check on the fence line meant a long trip. I forgot something in the shed meant urgent business. And I'll be back directly usually meant you were hoping no one noticed. You didn't talk about what you were doing. You simply disappeared for a bit. And if someone else was headed out, you waited. Outhouse lineups were rare but dreaded. Sharing, even rarer. The occasional 2-holer existed, but as a general rule, never sit beside someone doing the same thing unless your life depends on it. Still, moments of overlap happened. Like the time you accidentally opened the door while your cousin was inside. He screamed, you screamed. A hen that had wandered and screamed. For days afterward you avoided eye contact. Martha chuckles again, adjusting her shawl. I remember when my Jasper tried to build ours from an old wagon box. Saved on wood, he said. Trouble was, every time you sat down, the whole thing tilted backward. I swear I lost 3 pounds from the sheer fear of tipping. You grin. Everyone has stories, like the preacher whose outhouse blew open mid-sermon when a windstorm hit his hat, flew one way, his dignity the other. Or the traveling salesman who got stuck inside one during a heat wave and emerged shirtless, dazed and swearing he saw God. You offer Martha a coffee. She accepts. She pulls out her molasses bread, slices it, and you both sit on the porch, watching. The outhouse door swayed gently in the breeze. You know, she says, squinting toward it. It may not be much, but it's honest. Tells the truth. That moon does. You nod. It's funny how a little crescent cut into a crooked door became a shared landmark. A place you dreaded but depended on. A symbol of routine, humility, and let's face it, a little comedy dot. As the sun rises higher, more neighbors appear, wandering up for coffee, trade, or just to pass the time. And one by one, each of them glances toward the outhouse, gives a knowing smile, and shares a tale dot. It's become a kind of communal altar, a place for honesty, for reflection, for swatting flies and airing grievances, both personal and gastrointestinal. And, in the middle of it all, the moon-shaped cutout watches silently. It doesn't judge. It just swings in the breeze, letting in a sliver of light, and reminding everyone that no matter how tough or proud or buttoned up you are, eventually nature Calls. You stroll into town for supplies, boots dusty and hat tilted low against the glare. The general store smells like gun oil, dried apples, and whatever soap hasn't sold since last year. You wave to the clerk, toss a sack of beans into your basket, and make the mistake of lingering too long near the pickle barrel. Say, comes a voice from behind you. You hear what happened by the saloon last night? You turn. It's Clyde, the blacksmith, all mustache and muscle. He leans in like he's about to share a secret that'll change your life. They move the outhouse. You blink. The town one? Yep, right next to the alley behind the saloon now. Whole place smells like a cow pasture in July. You sigh. Not again, not in any decent western town. Managing where to put the public outhouses was a never-ending game of shuffle, stink, and simmering resentment. Every building had an opinion, and none of them wanted to be within sniffing distance. But someone had to lose. You wander outside, and sure enough, there it is. The offending shack squatting between the saloon and a stack of empty whiskey crates. The moon cutout is still visible, but now it seems less whimsical and more like a taunt. You step closer, trying not to breathe too deeply. Even with the breeze, the scent is unmistakable, ripe, sour, and not going anywhere soon. A puddle seeps from beneath the door. You back away. The stink wars, as people jokingly called them, were serious business. Town meetings would erupt into shouting matches over where the outhouses belonged. Behind the bakery, the baker would raise both eyebrows and say, "Not near my pies." Near the school, parents would argue that no child should have to dodge wasps and foul air on their way to arithmetic. Behind the church, blasphemy dot, so they moved them. Again and again, on skids, on wheels, sometimes even on sheer willpower, pushed by a few unlucky volunteers who drew the short straw. Historians still argue whether these fights over outhouse placement reflected larger tensions class, power, sanitation, access, or were just desperate attempts to avoid the worst-smelling corner of Main Street. Probably both. The town banker always managed to keep the privy far from his office, while the undertaker's lot seemed to inherit every rejected outhouse like clockwork. You watch a barmaid exit the saloon, take one whiff, and make a face like she's just bitten into a sour lemon. She grabs a bucket of soapy water and starts tossing it in the direction of the outhouse with a vengeance. Doesn't help much. You keep walking dot at the far end of town, behind the feed store. You notice another outhouse, smaller, neater. There's a basket of dried lavender hanging from the doorknob. Someone clearly put in the effort. You step closer. A little sign reads, "Ladies only. Please knock first." A private one. That explains the lavender. You tip your hat respectfully and walk on. Back in the day, town outhouses weren't just public, they were communal. Whole blocks shared one. You didn't knock, you waited. Sometimes you didn't even wait. You called out, "Anyone in there?" and hoped for a reply. Sometimes you just kicked the door. If someone screamed, it was occupied. You reach the post office and see a sign scrawled in pencil. Notice, due to odor, the back alley privy will be relocated by week's end. Of course. Someone finally cracked. You chuckle, remembering the time when a pair of kids, bored and mischievous, pushed the outhouse up to the church steps as a prank. The preacher nearly sat down mid-sermon. Before realizing something was very wrong with the vestibule, you overhear a conversation as you wait for your mail. Two women whispering about the smell. One swears she saw a rat the size of a dog crawl out from under the town privy. The other claims she watched a green mist rise from the pit last night. Green mist. No one questions it. You collect your mail, one water-stained envelope and a flyer for Dr. Ogden's magical worm cure, and head for the boarding house, where they serve weak coffee and strong opinions. At lunch, the conversation returns inevitably to the outhouse. Well, if they just bury the pit properly and lime it like we used to, one old-timer mutters, we wouldn't have this problem. Someone else snorts. Last time we limed the pit, it killed the roses. You planted roses next to a latrine? They grew great, just don't eat them. The whole room groans. Public outhouses weren't maintained well, if at all. They overflowed. They stank. They were breeding grounds for illness, especially in summer. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid. The stink wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. Cities eventually built more elaborate waste systems. But out here, a box over a hole was still the standard. And so the battle continued. Build it far enough away to keep the stink down, but close enough that nobody complains about the walk. A problem with no good solution. You leave the boarding house and walk toward the outskirts of town. There, on a small hill, sits the town's oldest outhouse. It's half-rotten, long abandoned, but still upright. A kind of monument to stink wars past. You walk up the hill, push the door open. Inside, someone once painted flowers on the wall, daisies maybe. There's a bird nest tucked in a corner of the roof. No smell now, just dust and history. You smile. Somehow it's peaceful here. Quiet. You step back out and let the door creak shut. The moon cutout still hangs above you like a knowing grin. This one's no longer part of the fight. It's retired, and for the first time all day, you breathe. Easy. You're mending a fence post when your cousin Hal comes galloping up the path, wild-eyed and grinning like he's just discovered gold, or at least something equally life-changing. Come on, he huffs, reining in his horse with flair. You've got to see what Pete built behind his barn. You frown. Is it alive? No, Hal says, breathless. Better. You follow him. Curiosity outweighing caution. Pete's place is about a mile out, a crooked homestead with a rusted windmill and chickens that look like they've been through something. But today everyone's ignoring the livestock. A small group has gathered around a newly built outhouse, and they're all giggling like children in church. It's bigger than usual. Fresh planks, sturdy door, and when someone opens it with theatrical flair, you see the magic. 2 seats. Side by side, you blink. A 2-holer. Pete beams, arms crossed, like he's just invented indoor plumbing. Built it for the kids, he says, so they don't fight over who gets to go first in the morning. You lean in, take a closer look. 2 holes, spaced just far enough apart to suggest civility, but not far enough to allow true peace of mind. The seats are smooth, well sanded. There's even a shared roll of catalog pages neatly threaded onto a wire nail between them. Efficiency, frontier style. Everyone's whispering, chuckling, wondering who would actually use both at once. One woman mutters, "That's just not right." A boy nearby asks if it's for races. Historians still argue whether two-holers were designed for practicality, sibling proximity, or just to mess with future archaeologists. Some even came with 3 or more seats, often in different sizes: adult, child, toddler, like a toilet Goldilocks zone. But who used them simultaneously? No one will admit it. You remember hearing once that some outhouses were built like this, at schools or orphanages where time and supervision were tight. Efficiency over privacy. Others say they were for emergencies. If 2 folks simply had to go, well, better together than not at all. Pete insists it's just a convenience. Ain't like we're sitting there holding hands, he mutters. Just makes the morning run smoother. You raise an eyebrow. You ever use it at the same time? Pete pauses. Only once, he admits. After chilly night? We don't talk about it. That's the strange thing. Outhouses were always solitary in concept, but shared in reality. You waited. You joked. You called dibs. But once you were inside, that was your time, your space, your struggle. A 2-seater threatens that delicate boundary. It forces intimacy on a ritual that most folks preferred to do alone, preferably while pretending it wasn't happening. You step back and admire the construction. For all the awkwardness, it's a nice build. Sturdy frame, hinges that don't squeal. Even the crescent moon on the door looks freshly carved. Used cedar wood, Pete says proudly. Smells better. It does. A little. For now. Later that day you return home and walk past your own outhouse. Single seat, classic, respectable. You give it a pat on the side like it's an old mule. Reliable, if a bit weathered. You sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the light fade. Your mind wanders to that 2-holer again. You can't stop picturing it. 2 people, 1 space. Both trying to avoid eye contact. Both pretending they aren't hearing anything. It's just not natural. But you get it. Families were big. Time was short. And comfort was a luxury. So if sharing meant avoiding an accident, then so be it. You once visited a ranch where the outhouse had a divider between the seats. Just a plank of wood, didn't go all the way up, didn't do much for sound, but it offered the illusion of privacy. Like drawing a line down the middle of a bed and telling your sibling to stay on your side. You also heard of a fancier family who painted the seats red and blue. His and hers, they said. And another who installed armrests, as if that somehow transformed the experience into something closer to sitting at a barber shop than atop a hole in the earth. You sip your tea and shake your head. The frontier had a strange way of blending practicality with absurdity. No one wanted to build a palace out of a latrine, but if you had the extra wood, why not add a second seat? Your dog barks and you look up. The windmill creaks. Somewhere down the path, Pete's new outhouse stands like a monument to progress and awkward silence. You think, briefly, of building your own 2-holer. You do the math. You consider the wood pile. You remember the chilly incident Pete mentioned. No. Some traditions are better left undoubled. Still, the memory lingers, and you find yourself wondering, if you did build one, who would you let share it? That night, just before bed, you head out for your usual trip under the stars. You step inside your 1-holer alone, just the way you like it. The door swings, shut with a familiar squeak, and the moon glows quietly above you. Peace. solitude, splinters.perfect. It's a breezy afternoon, and you're flipping through an old almanac by the fire, not reading, just idly skimming, looking at grained tables and moon phases you don't entirely understand, when nature taps you on the shoulder with that unmistakable urgency. You groan. You know the drill. You grab your coat, boots, and a handful of paper from the kitchen table. Except wait. You're out of paper? You scan the room. No newspaper, no leftover letters, no packing scraps. Nothing but a half-wrinkled Sears Roebuck catalog resting peacefully on the sideboard. You sigh. Again? Yes, again. You head outside with the hefty catalog under your arm like it's your favorite book. The outhouse waits, quiet as ever, door yawning slightly in the breeze. The crescent moon swings like a sleepy eye. You step inside, take a seat, and flip open the catalog to page 182, corsets, undergarments, and vitality tonics. A curious selection. This right here is how your great-grandfather wiped toilet paper. As a regular commodity, didn't reach the frontier for a good long while. It existed, yes, but it wasn't cheap, and it certainly wasn't the priority. When your money was needed for flour, nails, and whatever miracle elixir promised to make your mule smarter, people used whatever they had. Corn cobs, not joking, leaves, wool scraps, or the ever-present, ever-handy catalog. Historians agree the Sears catalog was one of the most commonly used wiping tools in the American West. It was affordable, delivered by mail, and incredibly versatile. You could shop for a pocket watch, read a snippet about stove care, and yes, clean yourself, all in one sitting. Efficient, if a little scratchy. You run your fingers down the page. The paper's thin but not brittle. The ink smudges just a little if you're sweaty. You pause at an ad for a galvanized bathtub. Luxury, you think, true luxury. You tear out a page with care, fold it methodically, and set it on the little shelf. Beside you, someone carved the word softer, and to the wall next to it. Possibly ironically, some families even had preferences. Glossy pages were too slick, so they tore from the back of the catalog first. Others swore by newspaper. Some resorted to leaves or pine cones. You once heard a story about a kid who tried using a flat rock. It didn't end well. Your cousin swore the Montgomery Ward catalog had better texture than Sears. You didn't argue. Catalog loyalty ran deep, and there was etiquette, too. You never used pages with important information tools, seed orders, gun parts. Those were off limits. Recipes, fair game, ads for braziers, depends on your mood. Boring legal disclaimers, tear away. One family down the road kept their catalog in a hanging pouch, carefully rotating pages like a manual filing system. Another glued theirs to a board so you had to rip with force. A third just tossed the whole book in the corner and let fate decide. You glance up at the shelf. Someone's carved a notch for holding the catalog upright, spine out. Fancy, later. You'd hear stories of people who collected catalogs for reading, not wiping. They kept them dry, safe, like treasured books. But for most, once the paper lost relevance, it gained purpose. The first actual commercial toilet paper on a roll was sold in the U.S. in the mid-1800s. But it was expensive, often rough and not widely available. And let's face it, frontier folk were frugal. Why buy paper just to throw it away when you had a 500-page book of cleanable, tearable, flushable, well, not really pages right there? The outhouse becomes your reading nook. You flip to a page of Suits 3-piece woolens for gentlemen. The model looks stiff, like he knows he's about to become something else entirely. You nod solemnly and tear. You remember one night when a visitor used the last few pages of your Sears catalog and left behind a note. I used the sock instead. Sorry. You never identified the culprit. You never wanted to, even after real toilet paper became more common. The catalog lived on in outhouses. Nostalgia, maybe? Or habit? Or just because sometimes ordering 200 feet of paper still felt like a waste compared to the free pages of products you didn't need but enjoyed skimming while, well, you sit back, sigh, and glance around the outhouse. Scrawled on the walls are little catalog reviews. Page 72 is too glossy. Avoid the corset section ink smears. Blank pages at back equals gold. You chuckle. There's history here. Not the kind taught in school, but the real kind. The lived kind. Quiet, practical, slightly absurd. The kind you only learn by choisi by, flipping a page and hoping it doesn't tear too soon. You stand, careful, and straighten your coat. You stack the remaining catalog pages neatly, replace the book on its shelf, and step outside. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows across the dirt. The wind rattles the outhouse door as it swings shut behind you, the moon cut out, glowing like a wink. And in your pocket, a torn corner of page 216 frying pans and ladles. You didn't use it, but you kept it. Why? You don't know. Maybe because some tools are too useful to throw away. It's just past midnight when you hear the boom. You sit bolt upright in bed, heart racing, ears ringing, blanket tangled around your legs. The sound echoes through the hills like a cannon. Somewhere outside, a dog starts barking. Then another. You wait. Silence. Then laughter. Slow, breathless, juvenile laughter, drifting up from the direction of the barn, or more specifically, the outhouse. You already know. You groan, throw on your coat, and shuffle outside. The night is cold, but your cheeks are hot with irritation. As you reach the fence line, you smell the unmistakable scent of gunpowder. Onions. The outhouse stands just as crooked as always, but something's wrong. The door hangs open at a weird angle. Smoke curls from under the seat, and the lid? Blown clear off and resting 10 feet away in the dirt like a splintered frisbee. You hear footsteps running through the trees. Yep, definitely kids. You've been pranked. Again. Outhouse. Pranks were as old as outhouses themselves. Every small town had its mischief makers, and every one of them seemed to agree that the best comedy was toilet-related, especially if it involved explosives. Historians still argue whether early outhouse bombings were more about protest, celebration, or pure chaos. Some say they began with Halloween traditions, gate night, when kids moved wagons, swapped signs, or blew the roof off your bathroom with black powder and a long fuse. Others believe it started with rivalries, one family irritating another, leading to the ultimate revenge, an outhouse explosion at 2 a.m. You take a step inside, cautious. The pit is intact, thankfully, but the floorboards are scorched. A charred stick pokes through the side wall. Someone definitely lit a small bundle of firecrackers and dropped it through the seat. It's a classic move, and this wasn't even the first time. You remember the summer when a group of teens tipped over the schoolhouse outhouse with a teacher inside. She emerged yelling words so spicy even the preacher blushed. That was the last time she taught grammar on a full stomach. Then there was the legendary tale of Uncle Virgil, who once found his outhouse nailed shut from the outside while he was inside. Had to climb out the roof. Said he saw his whole life flash before his eyes twice. Not all the stories were so funny. Once, in Missouri, a man was caught rigging a homemade explosive to a rival's outhouse after a land dispute. He got spooked and ran only for his coat to catch the fuse behind him. The boom blew out every window in the chicken coop. The chickens didn't lay for a month. You shake your head and begin gathering the pieces. The lid's split, but salvageable. You can plane it down, re-hinge it. The seat, well, the seat is now 2 seats. Not a planned 2 or more of a jagged, unwilling sibling separation. You look around. No sign of the pranksters. Probably gone to brag. You're too tired to fix it now. Instead, you hang a lantern on the outside hook, your universal signal, out of order use bucket. Tomorrow, you'll fix it. Again, as you walk back to the cabin, your mind drifts to outhouse crime. Yes, crime. Because people didn't just prank them. They robbed them. They hid in them. Some even used them for revenge. One town in Arizona caught a man hiding stolen gold under the seat of his family's outhouse, betting no one would dare look. He was right for a while, until someone noticed the boards were too new. A curious deputy investigated, and voila, crime solved. But the deputy needed 3 baths to feel clean again. In Tennessee, a feud between 2 neighbors ended when one filled the other's outhouse pit with sand. Subtle, cruel, effective. And sometimes people just set them on fire. No motive. Just a match and bad intentions. It wasn't always petty, either. Some used outhouses to eavesdrop. During tense elections, folks would sneak close to rival camps and listen to conversations through the thin walls of privies. Who suspected the little shack in the shadows was home to a makeshift spy? You once heard about a man who buried love letters under the outhouse so no one would find them. Maybe he hoped the smell would cover the scent of regret. Or maybe he just didn't want to explain the poetry. You reach your porch again, glance. Back one last time. The outhouse leans a bit more than it did yesterday. The door's crooked. A curl of smoke still drifts from the cracks. That moon-shaped cutout, though it's untouched. Still clean, still symmetrical, still smiling like it knows something you don't. You chuckle. Well, you mutter, at least they didn't tip it over this time. You sit, pull your coat tight, and sip from the last of your coffee. Now, lukewarm and bitter, even in destruction, the outhouse holds its place. A magnet for mischief, a target for teenagers, a source of stories you'll be repeating for decades. Tomorrow, you'll hammer it straight. Replace the hinges. Maybe add a note inside. Tamper at your own risk. Seat fights back. Because if there's one thing the Wild West taught you, it's that no matter how many times they blow it up, tip it over, or try to hide gold beneath it, that outhouse and its faithful little moon always comes back. It's nearly moonrise, and you're tucking in for the night, folding wool blankets around your legs and watching the last light of day stretch across the horizon. The sky has that slow fade lavender color that only happens when everything's quiet livestock fed, fire banked low, soup pot cleaned out. Your eyes start to close, and then, as if on cue, the smallest of tugs pulls at your bladder. You groan. Again? Yes, again. You shift under the blankets, weighing your options. Ignore it and risk waking up in agony? Or crawl out of bed, boots half-laced, coat over pajamas, and make the slow march to the moon-doored shack? You know the answer. You rise with a sigh, careful not to wake anyone else. The house is still. The floorboards creak gently beneath your feet. The lamp flickers as you pass. Someone left a half-eaten biscuit on the table. It smells like sleep, and smoke and something sweet, probably molasses. You push the door open and step into the crisp night. The outhouse stands just where it always does, down the path near the edge of the corn patch. But tonight you feel it differently. Maybe it's the silence. Maybe it's the cold. Maybe it's the fact that as a woman in a long flannel nightgown, you're about to trek 50 yards in the dark with nothing but a lantern and a strong will. Outhouse visits were harder for women. Always. Corsets, petticoats, skirts, layers upon layers, even in the heat of summer. In winter, had leggings, wool stockings, a bonnet, mittens, and whatever cloak didn't smell too much like sheep. And when nature called well, good luck managing all that in a freezing wooden box with one tiny hook to hold your shawl. Historians still argue whether the placement of outhouses in frontier life considered women's safety at all, or if it was purely about wind direction and well-water protection. Likely the latter, which meant that for most women, every nighttime outhouse visit was a full-on expedition. You walk slowly, lantern swaying, boots scuffing on frozen dirt. The wind picks up your skirts and swirls them around your legs. You clutch the hem with one hand to keep from stepping on it. Dot. You reach the outhouse and stop. There's something about the silence that makes you listen harder. You open the door. Dot. Empty. Good. Dot. You step in, hang the lantern on the hook, and begin. The familiar, frustrating process. Lifting layers, balancing over a wooden hole in the ground, hoping the seat isn't too cold, hoping your foot doesn't slip on some wayward pine straw, hoping no curious rodent decides now is the time to investigate. Even in the best circumstances, there's no dignity in it, but you get used to indignity out here. Some families build special modesty screens around their outhouses extra. Walls or a narrow path lined with bushes to give women more privacy. Others tried to designate hours for ladies only. None of it worked well. The truth was, the outhouse didn't care who you were. You remember stories passed down from the older women, your grandmother crouching behind a wagon wheel during long trail rides, skirts hiked and eyes on the horizon. Your great-aunt who swore by an empty chamber pot under her bed and used it until she had 8 children and no shame left to lose. You remember the time the preacher's wife had to wait 40 minutes because the only outhouse in the camp was occupied by 3 men and a deck of cards. She'd cursed them out in 3 languages. Dot. It wasn't just a matter of modesty. It was safety, too. Walking alone in the dark, especially in unfamiliar camps or traveling towns, was a risk. Wild animals, rough men, falling into the pit, It happened, and when it did, you didn't talk about it. You just washed, prayed, and tried to forget. You adjust your skirts, sit, and breathe. The wind whistles outside. The moonlight cuts through the crescent in the door and falls across your knees in a soft silver stripe. It feels strange, almost holy, like you're inside a little chapel of necessity. You think, not for the first time, about how much this little shack holds. Not just waste, but worry. Not just smell, but secrets. People cried here, laughed here, wrote poems on the wall, snuck in a sip of whiskey or whispered a quick prayer. Some women used it to sneak away from the noise of the house, just to have 2 minutes of peace. You've done it too. You look up at the ceiling. There's a dried flower tucked into the rafters. Who put that there? A girl? A boy? A lonely hand? With a soft secret? You finish, gather your layers again, and stand. It's a process. Every movement is calculated, practiced, and still sometimes ends with a cold draft up the spine, or a hem caught on a nail dot. You blow out the lantern and open the door. The air outside is even colder now, and the stars shine like sharp little pins in the fabric of the sky. The moon hangs full and proud above you, that same shape, the one carved into the door, the one echoed in legends, lullabies, and 1,000 awkward frontier stories watches over you now. As you walk back to the cabin, the sound of your boots, muffled by the dust, you slip back inside, careful not to wake the children. Someone murmurs in their sleep. The fire has dimmed to a glow. You crawl back under your quilt, feet like ice blocks, heart strangely calm. The moon still glows outside, and you know you'll see it again. Maybe not tonight, maybe not until spring, but it'll be there, watching, waiting, witness to all those quiet burdens no one ever writes songs about, except maybe now. The day starts with something unusual. A knock at the door, 3 sharp taps, and a pause, followed by a quiet shuffle. You open it to find the postman, Harold, holding a package under one arm and wearing a grin too wide for someone who's been walking through mud all morning. Got a delivery, he says. From the city. You raise an eyebrow. The city? Harold hands over a wooden crate marked fragile in faded black letters. Inside, porcelain, gleaming, white, modern. A toilet bowl. You blink at it. It gleams up at you like it's from the future. It even has a lid. The room behind you falls silent. Your cousin peers over your shoulder. What is that? You answer without thinking. Indoor plumbing. The words feel like magic, and just like that, everything starts to change. Indoor plumbing arrived in small bursts, wealthy ranches first, boarding houses next, then public buildings, one pipe at a time. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't always smooth, but once it began, the old ways started to creak a little more. That evening you wander outside out of habit. The outhouse still stands there, weathered and familiar. You open the door, peek inside. Same seat, same smell, same etched. Graffiti on the walls. Someone recently carved. We'll miss the view. You sit, not because you need to, but out of respect. Because this place has history. Outhouses were more than necessity. They were chapters of a way of life. And now that life is shifting, you think about the changes. No more icy walks at midnight. No more snakes. No more rainstorms slamming the door shut mid-squat. No more Sears catalogs. No more seat splinters. It almost feels like cheating. Still, historians remind us indoor toilets weren't instantly perfect. The earliest models had quirks: loud flushing, weak pressure, frozen pipes. Some families didn't even trust them. "If I can't see where it goes," one man said, "I don't believe it's gone." Some towns resisted altogether. Too fancy, they said, too fragile. They preferred the slap of the wind, the smell of pine shavings, the knowledge that you had to earn every flush with a bucket of water from the creek. But gradually, the new way won. It always does. You remember your grandmother refusing to use the indoor toilet for nearly a year. She'd walk right past it every morning and head outside to the old shack in her slippers and shawl, muttering, "I don't trust a pot that answers." Back, you smile. You understood. The outhouse had rhythm. It had ritual. It was yours, but time moved forward, and plumbing waits for no one. Back in town, the old community outhouses start disappearing. The school installs real bathrooms. The saloon builds one in the back room small, but with a working flush if you jiggle the handle twice. The church holds a meeting. Do we really want indoor toilets next to the sanctuary? After a week of heated debate, they vote yes. Soon after, someone tears down the last remaining shared outhouse. The town throws a party. They roast corn. They serve lemonade. Kids run around playing Tip the Outhouse, not realizing that real outhouses once tipped back. You stand with your neighbors and raise a glass. You nod, smile, clap politely. But later that night you walk back to your own crooked shack, alone. You open the door one more time. The crescent moon glows faintly in the darkness. You sit, you breathe, you remember, because this place, uncomfortable as it was, carved itself into your life, into your mornings, into your family stories. You reach up to the rafters and touch the little flower someone tucked there long ago. Still dry, still whole. You whisper, "Thanks for everything." The next morning you dismantle it piece by piece. The roof comes off first easy, just 4 rusted nails. Then the walls pried carefully with a crowbar. The seat is heavy, but you carry it like an old friend, arms wrapped around the scratched edges. You fill the pit with fresh dirt, pat it down, and plant a cluster of daisies in the center. They'll bloom in spring, and no one but you will know why. You keep one thing: the door. That perfect, lopsided slab of wood with the crescent moon. You hang it in your barn, right above the old feed bins. A tribute, because some symbols don't die. They just move indoors. Years from now, when your niece asks what that shape meant, you'll smile. You'll tell her about the stars overhead, about cold nights and long skirts, about catalogs, jokes, and snakes, about privacy and humility, and the little slice of silence between dinner and bed when the outhouse was your only escape. You'll say, "That moon? That was ours." You open the cabinet under the sink and catch a glimpse of shining white porcelain. The toilet hums faintly with a presence you never quite trust. You flush just to make sure it still works. It does, loudly, a sound like a miniature waterfall, fast and final. The water disappears, clean and efficient. No shovel required. No catalog sacrificed. No frostbitten cheeks or watchful raccoons. You step outside anyway, just for the air. The moon is rising, same as always. Fat and golden on the edge of the horizon, it cast soft shadows across the barn, the empty pasture, and the patch of daisies, now blooming where the outhouse once stood. They swayed gently in the night breeze, unaware of the history under their roots. Funny how the world changes without asking. You lean on the fence and let your thoughts wander. The outhouse is gone, now replaced. Improved, flushed out of memory by technology and comfort. Yet it lingers, not just in the stories or that old moon-shaped door now mounted in your barn, but in your bones. You still wake up sometimes before dawn, instinctively reaching for your coat and boots, forgetting for a moment that you don't have to step outside anymore. The toilet is 10 feet away, but your body remembers the midnight walk, the lantern's creak, the cold slap of the wind through the planks. You remember the smell of pine and lye, the carved graffiti, the sense of vulnerable peace in that tiny wooden box under the stars. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, but it was real. And though the world has paved over the pit and plastered the seat, the outhouse survives in cartoons, in Halloween decorations, in childhood jokes whispered under blankets. That crescent, moon so simple, so persistent, outlived the very thing it once symbolized. Why? Historians still argue whether the moon was originally about gender, practicality, or just tradition passed down without question. But deep down you suspect the truth is less academic and more emotional. The moon meant solitude. It meant stepping away just for a moment, from the noise, from the heat, from the family, the chores, the expectations. The outhouse, for all its stench and discomfort, gave people one rare thing, a place to be alone. Even now, in your tiled bathroom with the working fan and the glossy floor, you sometimes find yourself lingering, not because you need to, just because quiet still matters, because that sliver of time is still sacred. Even in modern disguise, you glance up at the night sky again. That old moon winks back, familiar and unchanged. Maybe that's why it sticks around in toy. Design on cabin signs, on those joke t-shirts you see at rest stops across the Midwest. It's a symbol of something simpler, something awkward, hilarious, humbling, something human. You take one last look at the patch of daisies and smile. You know exactly where the outhouse stood. You could walk the path in your sleep. And even though your boots stay dry now, even though your seat is warm, you're glad to have known that old wooden shack with its stubborn hinges and proud little moon. Because without it, there'd be no stories to tell and no reason to smile. At a shape carved into wood, glowing softly in the dark. And now, as the night stretches long and still, you find yourself drifting, your breath slow, the world softening around the edges. The air grows cooler and that familiar hush settles. And across the land, the chickens are quiet, the fire has faded to embers, and not a single floorboard creaks. You let your thoughts wander, not to porcelain or plumbing, but back to a small crooked shack standing at the edge of the world. A place where the stars were always brightest, where the breeze slipped through the boards and the moon kept watch from above. That outhouse, awkward, unglamorous, unavoidable, was a part of daily life. It asked for patience, humility, and sometimes courage. But it gave something too: solitude, space, a moment of peace that no one could interrupt. So as you close your eyes, picture the slow sway of tall grass under a silver sky. Picture the creek, of a door on rusted hinges, the gentle glow of a crescent moon, that old wood warmed by sun, cooled by time. No pressure now, no urgency, just rest. Let your body grow still. Let your breath deepen. Let the images blur into quiet. You're safe. You're warm. The moon is still there, watching, smiling, remembering. Sleep comes easily now, as natural as the wind, as certain as morning. Just close your eyes. And drift. Sweet dreams.